and the thing is that with the equity groups, their focus was on a different end of the business. And so the people that come in have a vast business knowledge, but very little understanding of the consumer. The cannabis operators understand the consumer, but they have very little knowledge of how an industrial business functions. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think thing that I talk about a lot is like understanding that legacy consumers, new consumers, and consumers of color, consumers of different group types require kind of a different marketing. The way you market to people from the Latin X culture and how you market to people from the Filipino culture, we're not all the same. And we all have different traumas around cannabis, right? So I'm Mexican. When I went to college, my mom was like, don't smoke marijuana or they're going to think you're a lazy Mexican, right? There's these tropes in every group of, if you do cannabis, if you smoke marijuana, if you smoke weed, there's a whole trope for people of color that you also have to get around in order for get them to feel comfortable partaking in the cannabis industry. And I think a lot of the CPG markets that you were mentioning and a lot of those executives really didn't know that. They didn't know like, oh, we don't have to just get over the fact that it's cannabis, but that for decades, these cultural and ethnic groups have been traumatized, killed, beaten down, told that they were lazy, told that they were thugs, told that they were. There's a whole thing you have to get around to be able to bring those consumers in. And they're only going to come in if you have an authentic voice. So if you're a CPG company thinking you're going to come in here and do an Apple store, there's a whole group for that. But there's like 1 in 5 people in the US are Latino, 1 in 7 are African American, 1 in 11 are Asian American. That buying group has over $5 trillion worth of buying power. You're not going to move them. And so you're just stuck with this one group, and because you haven't thought past that. And if you don't have that authentic voice, they're not going to go to you.
Yeah, it's just a disconnect, and it's a huge one. And I see them slowly moving towards the realization of it. But it's just so ironic because for me, when I started to see the rise of these mega companies, I had an assumption that they would approach business from such a calculated manner. And what I realized is they're just throwing buckets of money at the wall, hoping something sticks. And it blew my mind.
Isn't that wild though? Isn't that like the most wild thing you've ever seen?
I've never seen anything like it. And I mean, some of the operations, like for me, I do a lot of consulting on genetic selection and how to understand markets. And so it puts me into a lot of large operations to see. And I just sometimes when we're speaking, I'm like, wow, it's like the first time they heard these ideas.
You're like,
and I said, I want to meet your investors because I want to throw a deck at them. Because if they're throwing money at this, holy shit. So
I know it's wild.
Mm-hmm. But it's what it is, and it's just really about trying to weed through it and stay focused on what you do, so that you're able to provide the value you provide. And when California got kind of crazy, I own a farm too, and in California, and so I just fallowed the farm and spent my time doing the development in Australia. So I got brought in to do the first dispensaries in Israel. So I helped them launch the dispensary industry in Israel. And then I got brought into Australia, and we're putting the first dispensaries into Australia. And so they bring me into the countries to do genetic selection and understand market. But because I built dispensaries and operations, I see the picture in a really cohesive way. And so it's been really fascinating to work in these other countries. And I just got recently tied into the country of Morocco, because what they want to do as a country is to stabilize their industry. And how do you bring it forward? How do you protect the culture? How do you protect the craft? How do you protect these farmers that are so dependent on this product that they've produced for the last 1,000 years?
Yep.
And how do we bring that forward? And so, stuff like that to me is just, it's fascinating, and it allows you to keep your mind off of these ups and downs. And I'm lucky that I'm able to, because so many of the people I'm involved with, they don't have a global reach. And so they're forced to stay within the state. And we're talking about some mismanagement, and you'd almost want to say, you know, corruption in the way the situation was rolled out with the unlimited medium license. And so when they had that initial 5-year piece, see, when all this got rolled out, I had Gavin Newsom come to my office. So I had Newsom and his crew come to my facility and have lunch with me at my spot. So when they would develop and legalize cannabis, I was someone that had a whole series of operations that were fully running. And when the state got to see it, it was like, whoa, they really didn't expect to see what they saw. And it allowed us to have a different conversation. And I was someone who created the economic index in Humboldt for how much money was actually being created. And it was the first economic index ever done. And what that did is it allowed me to get access to the heads of the tax bureau in California, which is Fiona Ma and George Runner. And so I had this unusual occurrence where I had every major politician in the state of California come through my office to talk about cannabis, to understand how do we merge all these pieces. And I had such hope because there was so much work going into understanding. And as soon as they get to the, you know, Jerry Brown's desk, you have a group that petitions for unlimited medium licenses. And what it did is it allowed people to get around that 5-year moratorium. And the irony was the group that pushed it forward is the ones that are known as these medical advocates. So it was like a betrayal in a sense to the very people that had created their industry. The people you depended on to do what you did, you just screwed. And that's something that it's hard to look at them nicely now, because you realize that, like, oh, for a couple $100,000 in lobbying fees, an incredible change occurred that basically wiped out the ability for any of these smaller groups across the state to function unless they were really adept at making connections to bigger brands, which isn't the skill set of the farmer. Most farmers are not outward in their behavior, they're inward. That's what cannabis allowed them to do, was find a vocation that allowed them to work by themselves in a secluded environment so they felt peaceful and generate income. The skill set isn't. I
was just saying, now you see some of the same people in New York and you're like, what are you doing? And you're like, it's worrisome, right?
It is.
You know, because you're like, we know coming from California how screwed up. Like, I'm like, how could he have talked to you, Gavin Newsom, and these people talk to you and still mess it up so badly? Like, how could they talk to an actual, because I didn't know that. I didn't know that you had talked to them. And like, I was always under the assumption that they were just not getting the right information. No, and now I know they did get the right information and they still messed it up. That's sad.
Well, some parts came out good. It was like, you know, like, I was able to explain to him as a legacy operator that if you don't allow us legacy operators to come forward in some capacity with existing canopy, no back tax assumption, and then no criminal penalty, that if you didn't allow us to do this, what we would do is we would continue forward doing what we were doing, but we would have to change what we produced. And when you have political people seeing the machine you've created, they realize that you could be a problem. And so they at least put that in, and we're the only state that has that. So some of the stuff we did was effective, but really it wasn't so much. I don't think it was really Newsom didn't take it. That was when Brown was still governor, right? And so what you had was you had Brown accept that decision right at the signing. And it was just such a clear money grab that so they're trying to figure out how to fix it, but the damage has been done. And so now it's trying to go and go forward. And so you can give all the tax band-aids you want, but what you effectively did was stripped everyone of their capital. You've created a situation where it's almost impossible to get investment on a farm that's not making money.
That's right.
So you have people that are they have no idea what to do. And I'm watching the whack-a-mole where they go to Oregon and they're going to Oklahoma. And now they're going to run to Florida. Everywhere with these new operations, people are running to try to open up. But the situation is the same.
Yeah.
You're in a radically different world than you were in. And it's just really having to just accept it and say, I got you. That's the world we live in. This is how America operates. We like limited companies. We like big companies. We don't really foster small business, even though the majority of businesses in America are small businesses. It's just they don't generate the majority of the tax revenue.